A millionaire mocked her weight and married her on a dare, but she taught him a lesson he'd never forget. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. It all began on a glimmering night in Napa Valley, under chandeliers made of crystal and skies that had forgotten what darkness meant. The estate was buzzing with champagne toasts, designer laughter, and shallow ambitions wrapped in silk. Nathan Cole, tech tycoon, billionaire by 30, and tabloid darling, stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by models, moguls, and men who wore power like perfume. He was the kind of man who never lost. Not in business, not in love, not even in games he didn't care to play. But that night, something changed. Eric Duval, his oldest friend and occasional rival, leaned over with a smirk that held years of resentment. "You know what your problem is, Nate," he said, swirling a glass of aged scotch. "You've never done anything without calculating the reward first. Even your love life is a spreadsheet. Blonde, size 2, trust fund. Check, check, check. You don't love women. You collect them." Nathan chuckled, brushing off the jab like lint on his tailored jacket. "I like what I like. Is that a crime?" Eric's eyes gleamed with something more than mischief. "I dare you, then, just once, marry someone who doesn't fit your precious criteria. Someone different." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Define different." "A woman who doesn't belong on magazine covers," Eric said slowly. "Someone overweight, average job, nothing glamorous. Marry her for a year, publicly, legally, the whole thing." The room hushed around them, as if fate itself leaned in. Nathan's smirk didn't fade. "What's in it for me?" Eric leaned closer, voice low. $2 million. Straight to your favorite charity if you pull it off. But if you back out or fail to last the year, you give me the licensing rights to the neural AI project your company's been hiding. It was madness. It was cruel. It was everything Nathan's world secretly thrived on. He didn't pause to consider the implications. His pride flared like wildfire. Deal! A handshake sealed it, the kind that burned bridges with invisible ink. That very night, Eric sent Nathan a name: Leah Monroe. Nathan clicked on the profile Eric texted over, expecting the worst. Instead, he found something unexpected. A round-faced woman in a sunflower dress, grinning wide with a stack of books in her hands, standing beside a community library sign in Oakland. She wasn't model material. No. But there was something in her eyes, fierce, warm, unfiltered, that made Nathan pause. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time, the game didn't feel like a game. A few days later, dressed down in jeans and a clean white shirt for optics, Nathan walked into a Saturday book fair hosted at a local park. Children laughed in painted booths. Parents sipped lemonade. And at the center of it all stood Leah, directing volunteers, reading aloud, balancing toddlers on one hip and joy on the other. She looked up as he approached, brows lifting as if sensing the weight of a stranger's intent. "You're a little overdressed for a puppet show," she said, smirking. Nathan blinked. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't trying. He smiled. "I'm here for the books." Leah tilted her head. "Or the challenge. I know who you are, Mr. Cole." She extended her hand, not with awe, but like someone giving directions to a lost tourist. "You're late." Nathan laughed for the first time in weeks. Something strange curled in his chest. Interest? amusement, guilt. He didn't know then that she would become the mirror he never dared look into, that the bet would unravel not only his arrogance but the very foundation he had built his identity upon. He didn't know that Leah Monroe, an ordinary woman by the world's standards, was about to teach him the difference between building a life and buying one. But he would, and it would cost him everything he thought mattered. Leah Monroe had never been one to second-guess her instincts, and yet there was something unsettling about Nathan Cole. He was too polished for a community event, too deliberate in his every word. His smile was practiced, his compliments a little too smooth, and yet she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She didn't know what he wanted, but she could tell he wasn't here for the books. Still, she offered him a tour of the library's donation drive, her tone neutral, but her eyes watchful. She was used to people underestimating her, reducing her to the sum of her size, her modest income, her quiet routines. What she wasn't used to was someone like Nathan, someone from another planet entirely, pretending to care about things like after-school literacy programs or overdue book fines. And yet he lingered, asking questions that didn't sound rehearsed. When he laughed at a child's joke or stooped to help a woman with a stroller, it didn't feel fake. Leah couldn't tell if it was genuine or if he was just very good at pretending. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned and the tables were packed up, Nathan surprised her by offering to help carry crates to her car. She almost declined out of habit, pride prickling like a thorn. But something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't commanding. He was asking. So she nodded. They walked in silence for a bit, the sun casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Then Nathan broke it. "You're not like anyone I've met before," he said, more to himself than to her. Leah glanced at him. "And you're exactly like everyone I try to avoid." His head turned at that, amusement flickering across his face. "Fair enough." He leaned against her car once the last crate was loaded, wiping his hands on a napkin from his back pocket. "I was wondering, would you have dinner with me sometime?" Leah blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Is this a joke?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's not a joke." She crossed her arms, standing tall despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "You don't even know me. That's why I'm asking." There was a beat of silence between them, charged and awkward. She wanted to say no. It would have been safer, easier, smarter. Men like him didn't look twice at women like her. They didn't ask them to dinner without some hidden motive. But Leah had never been afraid of taking chances, especially when something didn't make sense. She wanted to know why. "Fine," she said slowly, "but I picked the place." Nathan grinned. "Deal." They met the next evening at a tiny Ethiopian cafe Leah loved, the kind of place tucked into a strip mall, where the chairs wobbled and the food was magic. Nathan showed up 10 minutes early, dressed in a sweater and jeans, looking out of place but trying not to be. Leah watched him from her car for a minute before going in. He was staring at the menu like it was written in code. Over injera and lentils, something shifted. Nathan asked about her job, how she balanced teaching part-time at the Adult Learning Center and running community events. She spoke with fire when she talked about the people she helped, her hands moving, her voice firm. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even check his phone. At one point, she caught him staring, not at her plate, not at her figure, but at her. And not with the usual judgment or pity, but something else. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "What were you expecting?" Someone bored, trying to impress me, but you're interested, or pretending really well. Nathan's expression turned serious. What if I said I wanted to get to know you for real? Leah arched an eyebrow. Then I'd say I don't believe you yet. They finished dinner, and as they walked to her car, Nathan asked if they could do it again. Leah didn't answer right away. She looked up at him, searching for something beneath the charm and expensive cologne. Maybe, she said. We'll see. But as she drove home, her fingers tapping the steering wheel, Leah felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't trust, not yet, but curiosity. And in that quiet space where doubt used to live, something unexpected had started to bloom. She didn't know Nathan was playing a game, and he didn't know that she wasn't a pawn, not even close. Nathan hadn't planned for this part to be difficult. After all, the bet had seemed like just another challenge. One more chance to prove he could bend any situation, anyone, to his will. But there was something about Leah that didn't align with the rules of the game he usually played. She wasn't easily impressed, didn't cling to his every word, and certainly didn't care about the power his last name carried. And that was making everything infinitely more complicated. Their second date, if it could be called that, was even more humbling. Leah had invited him to volunteer at the weekend community food pantry. He'd arrived expecting to be praised for slumming it with the locals. Instead, he was handed a box of canned goods, a name tag, and put to work. No one cared who he was or what he did. They were too busy trying to make sure the families in line had enough for the week. Leah worked with practiced precision, greeting people by name, asking about their children or their jobs. Her energy was boundless, her empathy sincere. Nathan, used to being the most important person in the room, found himself invisible. And strangely, it didn't bother him. It was during a short break that Leah handed him a bottle of water and sat beside him on the curb. She didn't speak for a moment, and neither did he. The air between them felt honest. You're not built for this kind of work, she finally said, but there was no malice in it, just observation. Maybe not, he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. But I want to understand why it matters so much to you. She glanced at him, curious. Why? Because I don't think I've ever met someone so unshakably themselves, he said. And that kind of person doesn't just happen. Something made you this way. Leah studied him, then looked away. Life did. It was the first crack she'd allowed him to see, and it stayed with Nathan long after they left. That night, he lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, while his conscience, a thing he hadn't acknowledged in years, began to stir. The next morning, Nathan's friends began to press him for updates. The bet was still very much alive in their circle, although only Jack, the one who had initiated the challenge, knew the full terms. Nathan brushed off their questions, laughing it off as going according to plan. But in truth, he couldn't stop thinking about Leah's eyes, her resilience, her ability to disarm him without trying. What had started as a game was now a maze of contradictions. Every time he thought he had the upper hand, Leah would surprise him with another layer of strength, humor, or grace. She didn't try to win him over. She didn't even seem to want him around. And yet, he kept coming back. A few days later, he invited her to his world, not to impress her, but to test something within himself. He brought her to a private charity gala, one of those black tie events where everything shimmered and everyone pretended to care. Leah stood at the entrance in a simple navy dress, her hair in a soft twist, her presence radiating quiet confidence. People stared. Of course they did. She wasn't thin, wasn't dripping in diamonds, wasn't someone they expected to see on Nathan's arm, but she didn't flinch. She shook hands, asked questions, and listened more than she spoke. And when a woman made a passive-aggressive comment about her dress being brave, Leah smiled and replied, "Comfortable too. You should try it sometime." Nathan watched from across the room, something shifting inside him. For the first time, he felt pride not in being seen with someone beautiful, but in being seen with someone fearless. After the gala, he walked her to her car, uncharacteristically quiet. "You held your own," he said finally. "I wasn't there to impress anyone." "I know," he replied. "That's what made it impressive." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Is this still just a game to you, Nathan?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He could lie. He'd done it 100 times before, but something in him wouldn't allow it tonight. "I don't know what this is anymore," he said honestly. Leah stared at him for a moment, then nodded once and opened her car door. "Figure it out," she said, before getting in. As she drove away, Nathan stood there in the dark, unsure for the first time if he wanted to win the bet or if he was afraid of losing something much more important. Nathan wasn't used to uncertainty. For most of his life, he'd been able to predict outcomes, maneuver people, and get what he wanted with ease. But with Leah, there was no script, no playbook to follow. Her honesty, her fire, her complete disinterest in his wealth, these weren't obstacles he could bulldoze his way through. They were reminders that not everything could be bought or bent. The morning after the gala, he sat in his home office, the skyline of Chicago sprawling out before him, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Leah's question, "Is this still just a game to you?" and how much it had shaken him. The worst part was that he didn't have an answer. What had started as a bet had taken on a life of its own, blurring lines he once thought were clear. He'd told himself it was curiosity, then admiration. But now it felt like something deeper, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. Later that week, Nathan called Leah, asking if she wanted to grab dinner. Nothing fancy, just something casual. He half expected her to turn him down, especially after the tension that lingered between them after the gala. But to his surprise, she said yes. They met at a local burger joint in Lincoln Park, the kind of place where you order at the counter and find your own seat. Leah was already there when he arrived, sipping a milkshake and flipping through a book. When she saw him, she gave a small smile, guarded but not cold. They talked for over an hour, laughing more than either of them expected. Nathan found himself opening up in ways that startled him. He told her stories from his childhood, about his strict, success-driven parents, about how he'd been pushed into business school before he even knew what he wanted. Leah listened without judgment, only asking questions when he paused long enough to breathe. At one point, she looked at him seriously and said, "You don't have to impress me, Nathan. I'm not keeping score." Her words hit him like a wave. No one had ever said that to him before. In his world, everything was a scoreboard: net worth, property, influence. But with Leah, none of it seemed to matter. And for the first time, he began to wonder what his life would look like if he stopped trying so hard to win. Over the next few weeks, something between them began to shift. Nathan stopped trying to dazzle her with grand gestures. Instead, he showed up. He helped her organize a fundraiser for a local women's shelter. He spent weekends packing food boxes with her at the pantry. He listened more than he talked. And slowly, Leah's walls began to soften. Still, there were moments when she pulled back, unsure. She had been hurt before, not just by men who overlooked her, but by a world that often treated her as invisible or unworthy. And though Nathan was different in many ways, she still struggled to believe that someone like him could see her fully and choose to stay. One night, after a long day of volunteering, they sat on a park bench overlooking the lake. The city lights reflected in the water, the wind cool and steady. Leah hugged her jacket tighter around herself, and Nathan instinctively shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I want to." They sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "Why me, Nathan? Out of all the women you could be with, why me?" He turned to her, his gaze steady. "Because when I'm with you, I'm not pretending. I don't have to be the millionaire, or the deal maker, or the guy who always wins. I just get to be a man who feels lucky to be sitting beside you." Leah didn't answer right away. She looked out at the water, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. Something in his voice told her he wasn't playing anymore. Maybe he never really was. Maybe she'd just been too afraid to believe it. That night, when he walked her to her door, she paused before going inside. "I'm still figuring this out," she said softly. "But I'm not walking away." Nathan nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in months. "Neither am I." For the first time since the bet began, it no longer felt like a game. It felt like something real, something worth risking everything for. Nathan had always believed that strength came from control, controlling outcomes, people, emotions. But now, sitting across from Leah as she enthusiastically described her new community art project, he realized strength looked very different on her. It looked like passion, generosity, and resilience. It looked like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to give. And for the first time in his life, Nathan wasn't intimidated by a woman's strength. He was inspired by it. Their connection had deepened beyond fleeting attraction or curiosity. It was something grounded in mutual respect. Yet even as the days passed and their relationship found a steady rhythm, Nathan couldn't shake the growing anxiety inside him. There was still one thing Leah didn't know. One thing that, when it came to light, could shatter the fragile trust they had built. The bet. What had started as a foolish dare from his friend Oliver at a private club, a drunken boast that he could charm and marry someone entirely outside of his type, had now become a chain wrapped around his conscience. At first, he'd seen Leah as a means to an end, a wild card in a game of egos. But she had flipped the rules on him. She had changed the entire equation. And now, the secret felt like a betrayal far deeper than he ever intended. One evening, they hosted a small gathering at a community center Leah had been volunteering at. Nathan had offered to sponsor the event, insisting it should be in her name, not his. Watching her float from one group to another, encouraging a teenage poet, laughing with an elderly couple, helping a little girl adjust her glasses, Nathan felt an emotion he wasn't used to. Pride. Not pride in ownership or reputation, but in simply being near her, watching her light fill the room. Later that night, they walked back to Leah's apartment under the soft glow of street lamps. She was quiet, her arm looped through his, her fingers absently tracing patterns on his sleeve. "You seemed a little off tonight," she said, not accusing, just perceptive. He hesitated. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice rough. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Leah stopped walking. Her expression shifted, not in fear, but in readiness. "Okay," she said gently. "Tell me." Nathan felt the words choking him. "The reason I met you, the way it all started, it wasn't completely honest. I was dared. Oliver, my friend, he said I couldn't marry someone who didn't fit the image everyone expects from me. And God, Leah, I agreed. I agreed like it was a joke, like it didn't matter, like you didn't matter." He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "But then I got to know you, and everything changed. You changed everything. This isn't about a bet anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." For a moment, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Leah didn't speak. She didn't even move. Then, she took a step back, and it was as though the air between them shifted. Warmer, but heavier too. "I knew," she said finally. Nathan looked up, startled. "What?" "I had a feeling. Maybe not at first, but after a while, I started to see the way your friends looked at me, the way they talked about me when they didn't think I could hear. I didn't know the details, but I knew there was something." He swallowed hard. "Then why did you stay?" She drew in a breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Because I saw you changing. I saw you fighting with yourself. And I wanted to see which version of you would win." Nathan felt tears sting the back of his eyes. He had prepared for anger, for betrayal, even for heartbreak. But this quiet grace, broke him more than rage ever could. Leah stepped forward again, her voice softer now. "I'm not saying this doesn't hurt, Nathan. It does. Knowing I was part of a game, even briefly, that stings. But the man who just confessed to me, the man who looks at me like I'm the only thing that makes sense in his world, that man, I believe in him." Nathan took her hand, trembling with the weight of her forgiveness. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm not that man anymore," he whispered. "You don't have to prove it," she said, squeezing his fingers. "Just live it." And as they stood under the quiet night sky, Nathan knew something sacred had just happened. Not an ending, not even a resolution, but a turning point. A place where love, once born in deception, had found its truth. A love that had fought through shame and pride, and chosen, at last, to grow. The days after Nathan's confession felt fragile, as if every step forward had to be taken with care. Leah continued her life with the same dedication, teaching her art classes at the community center, helping local families, and organizing neighborhood projects. But there was a quiet distance in her presence. She wasn't shutting Nathan out completely, but something had changed. Her trust, though not broken, now required more than words. It required actions. Nathan understood this deeply. He had hurt her in a way that couldn't be fixed overnight. He didn't expect instant forgiveness anymore. What he wanted now was to build something with Leah that wasn't based on empty gestures, but on a real partnership, grounded in respect and patience. So he started showing up in small, meaningful ways, not with grand declarations, but with steady consistency. He began volunteering at the community center, not just to be near Leah, but because he genuinely wanted to understand her world. At first, The volunteers were skeptical. Nathan still looked out of place in his tailored clothes, and the whispers didn't go unnoticed. But slowly, as the weeks passed, people saw him sweeping floors, setting up chairs, helping children with homework, even painting murals under Leah's guidance. He didn't announce what he was doing, didn't ask for praise. He just showed up, on time, humble, willing to learn. Leah watched quietly, never once asking him to prove himself, but noting every effort. The children adored him quickly, especially Mia, a shy girl who rarely spoke to anyone, but found courage in Nathan's patient encouragement. Watching him kneel beside Mia, gently guiding her brush on a wall-sized canvas, Leah saw a side of Nathan she hadn't imagined before. Not the polished businessman, but a man willing to kneel in the paint-streaked dust of real life and build something from scratch. One Saturday, as they cleaned up after a long afternoon at the center, Leah approached him while he rinsed paint rollers in the outdoor sink. "You didn't have to be here today," she said, handing him a towel. Nathan looked at her, his eyes a little tired, but content. "I wanted to be." She studied him, the sincerity in his voice softening something in her. "You're different now." "I'm trying," he replied. "Not for show, not to win something, just because I like the man I'm becoming when I'm with you." For the first time since his confession, Leah smiled, a real one. "You're getting better with a paintbrush." Nathan laughed, "Only because I have a brilliant teacher." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of applause and laughter from inside. One of the teens was celebrating his scholarship acceptance, a boy Leah had mentored for years. She beamed with pride as she walked back in to congratulate him, and Nathan followed behind, quietly admiring how she gave herself so wholly to others. Later that evening, as they walked together through Central Park, the crisp fall air circling around them, Leah hesitated before speaking. "I didn't tell you everything that night," she said. Nathan's heart tensed. "What do you mean?" She looked straight ahead as they walked. "When I first heard about the bet, I was crushed. I wanted to walk away. But I didn't. Because part of me wanted to believe people could change. Not just for me, but for themselves." Nathan stopped walking. "You gave me a chance I didn't deserve." Leah turned to face him. "Maybe, or maybe you deserve the chance to become who you were always meant to be." There was a silence between them, not heavy, but reflective. "I want to believe in that version of you," she said, her voice low but sure. "But I need time." Nathan reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." And so they kept walking, not as a perfect couple, but as two people learning how to trust again, learning how to rebuild from the wreckage of a beginning born in pride and deceit. The path was uncertain, but the foundation was changing. No longer built on a bet, but on the quiet strength of real love, tested and tried, growing still. The weeks that followed were quieter but more meaningful than anything Nathan had experienced before. Without a clear definition of their relationship, he and Leah fell into a gentle rhythm. It wasn't romantic yet, not in the traditional sense, but it was deeply personal. They spoke often, walked together through the city, attended community events, and shared meals with volunteers after long days of service. Each interaction felt like a layer being peeled away, revealing more truth between them. Nathan had transformed. That was something Leah couldn't deny anymore. The man who once thrived on arrogance and conquest was now someone who arrived early to mentor local teens, someone who stayed late to help fix a broken heater at the center, someone who listened more than he spoke. And slowly, Leah's walls began to shift, not crumble, but shift, under the weight of the sincerity he showed day after day. But it was during one particular weekend that everything began to change. The community center was preparing for its annual fundraising gala, a modest but important event that brought in the resources to keep its programs alive. Leah had organized it every year since its inception. Normally, she'd handle everything herself: decor, logistics, food, and performances. But this year, without asking, Nathan offered to help. "I don't want to just donate money," he told her. "I want to build something with you." And he meant it. In the days leading up to the gala, Nathan threw himself into every detail. He contacted local businesses to donate supplies, arranged transportation for families, even helped repaint the main hall when they realized the walls were too scuffed to be presentable. He worked alongside volunteers, laughed with them, and never once mentioned his name or wealth. He was simply part of the team. Leah watched from the sidelines, quietly absorbing it all. She still remembered who he used to be, but the man she was watching now, he wasn't doing this for redemption points. He was doing it because he cared. And when she found herself looking at him for longer than she should, when she caught herself smiling for no reason when he walked into the room, she realized something was happening that she wasn't prepared for. She was falling for him. The night of the gala arrived. The community center had never looked more beautiful. String lights sparkled across the ceiling. Round tables were covered in white linens, with small centerpieces handmade by the children, and soft music filled the air. Parents, donors, and families began arriving, mingling with volunteers, laughing and taking photos. Nathan stood at the entrance, helping greet guests. He looked sharp in a navy blue suit. But it wasn't the expensive fabric that made him stand out. It was the warmth in his smile and the sincerity in his eyes. When Leah walked in wearing a deep green dress, simple but elegant, Nathan froze for a moment. She wasn't trying to be glamorous. She never did. But in that moment, to him, she was the most breathtaking woman in the room. "You look," he began, unsure how to say it without sounding rehearsed. Leah raised an eyebrow playfully. "Be careful, Mr. Bennett. You're not as smooth as you used to be." He laughed nervously. "That's a good thing, right?" She smiled and looped her arm through his. "Depends on what you say next." The evening flowed beautifully. Guests shared stories of how the center had changed their lives. Children performed songs and dances. Donors gave generously, not just because of the pitch, but because they saw a real, thriving community. At the end of the night, when the last table had been cleared and the lights dimmed, Leah and Nathan stood in the middle of the empty hall, surrounded by remnants of celebration. "You did good," Leah said softly. "We did," he replied, stepping closer. There was a moment of silence between them. Not awkward, just full. Full of everything they had gone through, everything that had changed, and everything they hadn't yet said aloud. Nathan broke the silence. "Leah, I know I messed up in the beginning. I know I don't deserve your trust or anything more. But I've never felt this way before. Not about anyone. What I feel for you, it's not about guilt or trying to fix what I broke. It's just real." Leah looked at him, her eyes searching his. I believe you, she said quietly. And with that, she stepped forward, closing the space between them. For the first time, they didn't need to speak. The energy between them was enough. Nathan reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. There, beneath the quiet glow of fading lights, and the echo of laughter still lingering in the room, something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, but undeniable. They weren't perfect, but maybe, just maybe, they were exactly what each other needed. The days following the gala felt different, as if something had shifted in the air between Nathan and Leah. Their connection had moved beyond unspoken glances and tentative understanding. It had become something deeper, something that neither of them could deny anymore. But with this closeness came new complexities, and both of them were acutely aware of the delicate balance they were walking. Especially Leah. She had spent her entire life building emotional armor, not just against the cruel stares and judgment of society, but against the silent rejections that came with being different. She had mastered the art of keeping people at a distance, even while offering them her compassion. But Nathan had slowly, persistently found his way through that armor. And now that he stood so close to her heart, the fear of losing herself, or worse, being hurt again, grew louder. One evening, as the sky painted the New York skyline with dusky orange and lavender, Nathan invited Leah to join him at a rooftop garden he'd been renovating with the youth mentorship group. The space was still rough around the edges, with wooden planter boxes and strings of fairy lights waiting to be hung. But there was a kind of charm to it, something real, something hopeful. As they stood by the railing, looking over the city, Nathan turned to her. "You know," he began, "I used to think success was about being invincible, about building walls so high no one could touch me." Leah glanced at him, saying nothing, but her silence encouraged him to continue. "But then you came along, and you didn't just climb over the wall. You made me question why I built it in the first place." She let out a soft laugh, not mocking, just thoughtful. "You were pretty insufferable when we first met." "I know," he admitted with a smile, "but you still gave me a chance, even when I didn't deserve one." Leah folded her arms, her expression softening. "I didn't give you anything. You earned it, every single step." They stood there for a moment, the city humming beneath them, until Nathan gently reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she laced her fingers with his and turned toward him. "I want more," Nathan said, his voice low but unwavering. "Not just this, not just community events or late-night talks. I want a life with you, a real one, if you're willing." Leah's heart skipped. For years, she had imagined what love might feel like if it ever came her way. She had pictured someone who saw her, not despite her body, not in pity, but in admiration, in awe. And now, it was standing in front of her. But the fear hadn't vanished. It was still there, clinging tightly to old wounds. "Nathan, you say that now, but what about later? When life gets messy again? When people judge or whisper, or when things aren't perfect?" Nathan stepped closer, cupping her cheek gently. "Then we'll face it. Together. I'm not afraid of the world's opinion anymore. I only care about building a world with you." Tears welled up in Leah's eyes, not from sadness, but from the release of something heavy she had been carrying for far too long. "You have no idea how much I've fought to believe I'm worthy of something like this." "And you are," he said firmly. You always have been. They leaned into each other slowly. No fireworks, no drama. Just warmth, just truth. It was the kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. It simply existed. And in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, as they sat together on an old bench near the garden's edge, Nathan pulled out a worn journal. "I've been writing," he confessed, "trying to understand myself, trying to put into words what you've taught me." Leah raised an eyebrow, surprised. "I didn't think you were the journal type." "Neither did I," he chuckled, "but you've changed everything." He opened the book to a bookmarked page and read aloud. "True strength isn't how many empires you build. It's how much of yourself you're willing to tear down to rebuild something honest, real, whole. Be." Leah looked at him with a quiet intensity. "You really have changed. And it's because of you." They stayed there until the sun dipped below the skyline, the lights of the city flickering to life one by one, like stars waking up for the night. The rooftop garden wasn't finished, but it didn't matter. Something far more important had taken root. Later that evening, as Leah walked home alone, her heart felt lighter than it had in years, not because the past had disappeared, but because she finally believed the future could be hers to write, with someone who saw her, heard her, and loved her as she was. And that, more than anything, was the surprise Nathan had never expected when he entered into a bet. He had found something far more valuable than money or pride. He had found purpose, redemption, and love. The weeks that followed were like stepping into a new season of life, unfamiliar, beautiful, and sometimes overwhelming. Nathan and Leah, once two strangers caught in a web of pride and defiance, were now navigating the fragile but honest space between vulnerability and love. What began as a bet had transformed into a journey neither of them could have predicted. Yet, even as their relationship deepened, a shadow from the past still loomed. Leah knew something Nathan didn't, something she had chosen to keep hidden, not out of dishonesty, but from the quiet fear that the truth might shatter the world they were building. It wasn't about her past or her body. It was something far more delicate. She had been married once, years ago, to a man who made her feel invisible, even when she was standing right in front of him. It ended quietly, painfully. The divorce papers were signed without drama, but the emotional scars lingered, shaping how she approached every relationship after that. One quiet evening, as they sat on Leah's small balcony overlooking Central Park, sipping tea in the golden glow of the setting sun, Nathan noticed the distant look in her eyes. "You're somewhere else tonight," he said gently, placing his cup down. "Is everything okay?" Leah hesitated. She looked at the skyline, the lights flickering like whispers of stories told and untold. Then she turned to face him, her hands trembling just slightly in her lap. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Nathan leaned in, his expression calm, encouraging. "Whatever it is, I'm here." She took a breath, steadying her voice. Before all this, I was married. It was a long time ago, and it ended for 1,000 reasons I never really spoke about. But the truth is, I left that marriage feeling like I was too much and not enough all at once. He never saw me. He tolerated me. And when I walked away, I promised myself I would never let someone close enough to treat me like that again. Nathan didn't speak right away. He absorbed her words, like someone studying a fragile painting, taking in every color, every hidden detail. Leah, he said finally, his voice low, sincere. You don't ever need to apologize for surviving something that hurt you. That part of your life doesn't change how I see you. It just makes me understand you more. She felt her throat tighten. I was afraid that telling you might change the way you looked at me, like I had baggage. We all have baggage, Nathan replied. But yours? It's made you stronger, wiser, more compassionate. It's not baggage. It's a testament to how far you've come. She blinked, feeling tears rise. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from relief. I'm not that woman anymore, she said. But sometimes, I still carry the echoes of her. And I'm not the man who made that bet months ago, he replied. But I still carry the guilt of having started all of this that way. Their eyes locked, not with shame, but with understanding. Two people who had built walls for different reasons, now tearing them down together. I never thanked you, Leah whispered, for staying, for choosing me even when you didn't have to. Nathan took her hand and pressed it to his heart. I didn't just stay, Leah. I found home. That night, they didn't talk much more. They didn't need to. They simply sat in silence, hands intertwined, two souls learning to breathe again in a world that hadn't always been kind to them. The city moved around them, endless and loud, but in that small corner of sky and steel, peace finally settled. And as Leah leaned her head against Nathan's shoulder, she realized something. Healing doesn't always come in grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it comes in the quiet company of someone who simply refuses to leave. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just feel loved. She felt safe. Spring had just begun to bloom in New York City, painting the streets in soft hues of pink and green, as if the city itself had finally exhaled after a long, cold winter. For Nathan and Leah, this season didn't just mark the changing of weather. It marked a quiet transformation in their hearts, one that neither of them had dared to hope for at the beginning of their story. Nathan had spent years building a life rooted in control, calculation, and winning. Yet, Leah had upended all of that with nothing more than truth, resilience, and a heart that refused to be bought. She had made him question who he was and who he wanted to become. And over the past few months, he had chosen again and again to let go of the man who saw love as a transaction and step into a version of himself that sought something deeper. Now, they stood together in a quiet room, the walls decorated with soft candlelight and wildflowers Leah had arranged herself. It wasn't a grand ballroom or a luxury resort. There were no chandeliers or television crews or celebrity guests. It was simple, intimate, honest, just like them. This time, there were no deals, no hidden motives, no secrets. Just a man who had fallen in love with a woman not despite her weight, her past, or her scars, but because of the strength and beauty they revealed. Nathan turned toward her, his breath catching slightly as he took her hand in his. Leah looked radiant, not because of a designer dress or professional makeup, but because of the calm joy in her eyes, the kind that only grows from surviving, healing, and loving anyway. I never imagined, Nathan began, his voice steady but soft, that a simple bet could lead me here, to you, to this moment. But if I could go back and undo it, I wouldn't, because I would never risk not meeting you. You didn't just change how I see the world. You changed how I see myself. You gave me a reason to become better. And I promise, for the rest of my life, I will love you with the same courage you've shown me." Leah smiled, tears shining, but not falling. Her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. "I used to believe that love wasn't meant for me, that people only saw the surface and didn't care enough to look deeper. But then you came, unexpected, flawed, and messy. And somehow, you saw me, not just the woman I am today, but the girl who fought to stand here without apology. You didn't rescue me. I didn't need that. But you stood beside me while I rescued myself. And that's a kind of love I never thought I'd find." Their vows weren't traditional. They weren't memorized or rehearsed. They were real. Every word a reflection of the road they had walked, the one paved with mistakes, forgiveness, vulnerability, and growth. When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, the quiet room erupted into soft claps, warm embraces, and the scent of spring blossoms swirling in the air. But for Nathan and Leah, everything else disappeared. There was just the feeling of his forehead resting against hers, the sound of their shared breath, and the silent acknowledgement that their journey was just beginning. Later that night, as they danced slowly under the soft string lights hung above the rooftop of their apartment building, Leah laughed as Nathan tried to twirl her without stepping on her feet. "You're still a terrible dancer," she teased. "I am," Nathan agreed, "but I've gotten better at falling." She looked at him, puzzled. "Falling?" He nodded, pulling her a little closer. "For you." She laughed again, the kind of laugh that fills the soul, then rested her head against his chest, and for a moment the city faded. The world stood still, and all that remained was the quiet, undeniable truth that love, real, messy, beautiful love, had found its way through the cracks of broken beginnings and bloomed into something they never expected. Nathan once made a bet thinking he would win money. Instead, he found something priceless. And Leah, who once believed she had to prove her worth to be loved, realized she never needed to change, only to be seen. Together, they turned a shallow challenge into a story of redemption, healing, and the kind of love that no amount of wealth could ever buy. And that love, imperfect but unwavering, would carry them forward, not as strangers bound by a wager, but as soulmates who had finally come home. Nathan Hawthorne never expected to fall in love when he accepted the bet. To him, it was just another ego-driven challenge, a game designed to provoke and entertain his wealthy circle of friends, a test of vanity wrapped in the illusion of control. Marrying Leah Bennett, a woman who didn't fit society's narrow ideals of beauty, was meant to be a 6-month charade, a way to prove that his charm and wealth could conquer even the most unconventional of situations. But what started as a wager slowly unraveled the shallow foundations of his world. Leah wasn't like the women Nathan had surrounded himself with. She was strong, witty, unapologetic, and deeply rooted in a sense of self-worth that couldn't be bought or manipulated. She walked into his life not as a project, not as someone to fix, but as a mirror. One that reflected his deepest insecurities and forced him to confront the emptiness he had long ignored. Her confidence, even in the face of his dismissive arrogance, was a quiet rebellion that shook the walls of his carefully curated image. And over time, what once seemed like an unremarkable arrangement turned into something he couldn't ignore. Leah challenged him. She didn't bow to his money or status. She didn't change herself to fit his world. Instead, she changed the way he saw the world. Through her presence, Nathan began to strip away his old self, the one who believed appearances defined worth, the one who thought vulnerability was weakness, the one who measured love through conquest and pride. With every act of quiet defiance, Leah taught him that dignity and kindness weren't qualities to be negotiated, but honored. That love, true love, isn't loud or glamorous. It's consistent, patient, and born from acceptance. As the days turned into months, the lines of the bet blurred. Nathan started caring, genuinely, unconditionally. He found himself watching Leah laugh and realizing it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He began craving her company, not because it was part of the arrangement, but because it gave him peace. He started making her coffee the way she liked it, learning her favorite books, observing the way she scrunched her nose when she was focused. These little things, unnoticed by the world, became everything to him, and Leah, who had every reason to shield herself, began to let her guard down too. She saw his effort, not just in grand gestures, but in the transformation he undertook from within. It wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that authenticity is what ultimately made her believe that the man who once married her for a joke was now the man who loved her for all the right reasons. Their journey was far from linear. There were moments of anger, of heartbreak, of truths that cut deep. But in those moments, growth happened. Leah never lost herself in the process, and Nathan learned to find himself through her unwavering strength. What began as an empty challenge ended as a powerful union between two people who found beauty where the world told them it didn't exist. This story is not just about love. It's about redemption, about the possibility of change, and about how sometimes the most unexpected people can break down the walls we build to protect our egos and instead offer us something more meaningful: connection, compassion, and truth. The lesson from Nathan and Leah's story is simple yet profound. Never underestimate the power of seeing beyond the surface. We live in a world obsessed with appearance, with perfection, with curated identities. But true connection has nothing to do with those things. It is found in how we treat one another, how we listen, how we show up, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. It reminds us that every person carries a story, a depth that no photograph or first impression can capture. And if we take the time to understand rather than judge, to open our hearts rather than protect our pride, we just might discover that love doesn't fit in the boxes we were taught to believe. It is limitless. And sometimes, the greatest gift life can give us is someone who sees us for who we really are and invites us to become even more. Let Leah and Nathan's story be a reminder that love isn't found in perfection. It's built in the process, the fight, the forgiveness, and the quiet decision to stay, to grow, to choose each other again and again. If this story touched your heart and gave you something to think about, don't forget to support this channel by subscribing and turning on the notification bell. Your encouragement helps us continue creating stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the beauty in the human experience. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to share more unforgettable stories with you soon.